So, hello and welcome. It's lovely to see you again, Grace. Here we are in the Humanising Work Live Series, streaming live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, YouTube, and also recording for our podcast, which is available on multiple platforms, including Spotify. So we've been talking about different aspects of teams over the last week and a half. And today we're going to be talking about respectful relationships. And that's why I was so keen to have Grace back, because we've done quite a lot of work in this area. And so would you like to say hello, Grace, and introduce yourself again for those people who've not met you before?
Hello, fabulous to be here, Alex. Lovely to connect as always. So I'm Grace Walsh, business psychologist. That's my background. Worked across all types of industries, public, private sector, but I have a real passion for this topic around high quality connections, relationships, and how that feeds into not just our performance, but also well-being as well. So excited about this topic specifically.
Yeah, and it comes up time and time again, and never more relevant, I guess, than now, really. People are talking about making sure we have really meaningful human connections with everyone around us. And I guess that's where I kind of like to start today, is really thinking about what's the breadth we're even talking about here in terms of relationships. A lot of previous work we've done has been focused mainly on relationships in the workplace. And now the workplace has changed. Our relationships with work and others have changed as a result of that. And it really makes me think that, this work on relationships needs to be expanded. And this is really, I guess, the breadth that we're talking about here in Team Flow is going beyond kind of the work that we've already done to think about, okay, so what does it mean now to be in a workplace that's really human, to understand all of the relationships that we have, not just our colleagues, but maybe mentors, coaches outside of that, maybe informal ones as well as formal ones, friends and acquaintances, connections in learning networks, or if we're doing a course, people that we're meeting along the way. How do all those relationships, what do they mean for us right now? They've taken on slightly different meaning. What are your thoughts, Grace?
And it's interesting. I think we underestimated those kind of water cooler moment conversations with people that we just connected in with. We met as we're walking through the corridors. We have a quick kind of 5-10 minute catch up with. And that's really what we're hearing. I think we didn't recognize the importance of those conversations that we were having. And actually, it's really interesting. So obviously the key researcher, as we know in this space, Jane Dutton, she very much talks about those quality connections. Yeah. And they don't have to be those long-term relationships. It's actually in those small interactions that we have with people. And so, yes, I think this virtual environment obviously has put all of that really on its head. And actually now it really is more essential to be kind of making those connections with people outside of our usual networks that we might have. And, we hear some really great ways of people doing that, connecting with people in a really informal way, whether it be doing bingo on a Friday night or having drinks, after work virtually, just to really make those connection points, because people recognize the importance and the energy that brings to them. I know we talk about relationship and relational energy from those conversations. So yeah, and I think that we've all kind of really tuned into that in light of what we're experiencing and not having that kind of face-to-face connection with people.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think it works both ways as well. And I love what you're talking about there in terms of relational energy, because you really do get that. And it's sometimes, whether you know it or not, you go to people specifically to get a little bit of that boost, don't you, from people that are perhaps able to get you thinking in a different way that excites you, or just be more empathetic around things that maybe are struggling with. And then also, I think I've certainly experienced it too, is kind of staying away from some people, not because, not from my perspective, because they would have brought me down or anything like that, but because perhaps, times are too difficult. And sometimes over the last 3 lockdowns, there's been moments when kind of, you can't find the words really, and I don't want to chat, and I don't want to talk about the weather, and I just, kind of can't. So kind of that separation, and where have those gaps come, and how can we still nurture our relationships into the next, few months and years, where things are just changing continuously around us, and thinking about, as I said, all our relationships too, being, good, respectful, and high quality connections. And certainly we have more of a window into people's private lives now, where they're working in a home environment with other people around, and seeing their connections and their relationships in the home. But also knowing that we're affected by those relationships. If I have a disagreement with one of my daughters in the morning, I'll hold it all day, even if we've made up before she goes to school. I'll be still waiting desperately to see her face when she gets in and have a hug. And that's real, that's human. It's, all of those connections are so critical, and it's even more strange now to almost to switch those off in the workplace than it ever has been. So I think I'd love to talk to you a bit more about like the nurturing process, and why is it good to regularly nurture our relationships? I think this is a word that I found fascinating since looking at Jane Dutton's work, particularly, is around thinking, gosh, actually I've got friends, but I don't nurture those friendships at all. And that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah. And as you said, I think very often it's thinking about, and often in the workshops we're delivering and having those conversations, we talk about it in that work context. But actually, when we start exploring that beyond, we say, are we really engaging respectfully with everybody in our lives? When we think about our partner, our kids, family members, those things that we may take for granted. And it's quite interesting, I think, when we think about those high quality connections, when it is that we're in a respectful relationship. And when we think about how that makes us feel, I think that really is the key question, that we feel more open, we feel more competent, we have a real sense of vitality, and that kind of links into that relational energy. So they really are core, fundamental. And obviously the importance of really, really nurturing those. And, Jane Dutton herself, she talks about kind of ways that we can do that in those conversations, being present. And that's very easy said, but not always something we can do. And I find myself drifting in and out, being fully present in those conversations. And as I said, it doesn't have to be for like an hour, 2 hours. It can be just in those short interactions, but we're actually giving that person that full attention, conveying presence in those conversations. There's also that aspect of being genuine and authentic, which we touched on actually around that kind of emotional intelligence piece. So really being ourselves, and actually I think as human beings, we're really good at being authentic detectors. And so when we're seeing that person is not being fully genuine, that can really impact in that interaction. And the effective listening, active listening. As a coach, this is something as well I have to continue to really work on as a skill. So not just kind of thinking about what we want to get out of that conversation, really tuning into what that person is saying, but also as well what they're not saying. Too. So as I said, those kind of verbal, non-verbal clues in those conversations, and that real supportive communication piece as well. So there's some of the ways that we can really nurture those relationships and be really respectful in how it is that we're communicating.
And that's really helpful, isn't it? Because it's just a focus of attention, as you said. It doesn't need to be a long, maybe setting aside 2 hours to kind of reconnect with somebody. It can be something that even notices that that someone maybe not themselves virtually, pinging them a quick message. I had a message from someone yesterday just saying, "Oh, didn't hear from you this morning. Is everything okay?" And it's like, I was just like, oh, that's really kind, because they couldn't see me, they didn't know what I was up to, but just checking in. And that is that nurturing of that, just checking in. It's very small, but actually very meaningful. And it is those pieces that make a difference, isn't it? And as you said, it's important to our self-worth and our value. to feel that there is an impact on the people around us, and that I know many people like me. I talk to a lot of strangers. I'm someone who'll talk to everyone in a shop or on a bus or wherever I am. And I love getting that. I love getting a conversation going with a stranger about something ridiculous that's going on. It's fine. I love being able to talk to people, and I get a lot from that. And I didn't realize until all the lockdown started happening how much you get from that. That ability to just feed off other people and know that, you know, you're a person, you're present, you're here, and it matters that you've got a contribution. So it plays back into that unique contribution piece as well, doesn't it? Massively. And nurturing that, making sure that you don't just drop those things that are important to you is really, really important. So you talked about high quality connections. How do we, if someone was not sure whether they had, you know, a good friendship or an acquaintance, or perhaps whether they had a high quality connection, what would you suggest people would kind of feel or know if they did have a high quality connection, for those people kind of reflecting and thinking about some of their connections now?
And I love that question as well, and touching on the points that I kind of chatted through around when it is that we're in those respectful relationships, that we feel that kind of vitality, we feel an openness, a responsiveness in those moments. And it's interesting, when I actually ask that as a question in the workshops we deliver, often what comes through, and specifically when we talk about trust and knowing that it is you're in a trusting and trustful relationship, things that often come through is around safety, which is really interesting. It's often one of the first things coming through from people and reflections, but we feel stronger as well, reassured, we're more resilient. We feel we can be authentic, we can be open, we can be honest with that person, but also with ourselves. So it's quite interesting when I ask that question and some of the kind of emotions that people align with how being in a high quality connection feels safe and stronger. It's really quite powerful. And what that means, obviously, to how we're performing in work, of course, absolutely, but absolutely fundamental to our well-being, as we know as well.
Yeah. And it's that sense, isn't it, of this, that feeling of connection and cohesion, that you belong in this world, in this community, in this work context, in this team, in this organization, in this department. And the respectful part is critical, isn't it? We've talked a lot about respect, and how would we know if we felt respected in the workplace, and what does respect mean for people? What's the difference between, you know, respect and regard and being valued? And this respectful piece, again, is just, it's like a fundamental building block. It's like, if you start with respect, conversations are easier, challenges are easier, difficult times are easier. Because you know fundamentally that there is just this core of respect, and how does that display for people, and how would we know if that was a core part of our relationships? And there's something there about reliability as well, isn't there? And knowing that that feeling, exactly as you said, that trust relating to how reliable we feel for others, but also knowing that if there was a challenge or a problem or a bump in the road, we could go and speak to someone, and it would be okay. And we know that person would understand where we're coming from, because they've built that relationship. And that's so hard when you haven't built it, isn't it? Because you're working blind almost, in terms of knowing what someone's response is going to be.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think about dependability. So when it is that we're in those, you know, positive relationships, we have a feeling that obviously we can depend on that person as well. So it even kind of broadens it. It's not just about us. It's the fact that actually we can reach out to that person. they're a resource, and we talk about, kind of our developmental resources that we can kind of build and enable in ourselves to be more resilient, to be more confident, to be able to deal with all of the challenges. And there are some definite challenges that we're facing at the moment. And to be able to have that resource is absolutely fundamental. And those different connections that we can have. And as I said, that is a resource. It's a massive resource. And again, research shows over and over again, and we talk about relationships and we talk about the PERMA model of well-being. But I think, when you look at the research, there is just such a significant amount of research that underpins the kind of quality of the relationships that we have, and is the kind of most powerful predictor of our physical and mental health, which is absolutely key at the moment, and in light of what we're all experiencing work-wise, but also outside of work.
That isolation, and obviously we know loneliness was a huge issue before the pandemic even hit us, and people were really struggling with knowing who they could go to in certain types of circumstances. And I guess the piece that occurs to me while we're talking is that do other people know the difference between friendships and high quality connections? And quite often, if you speak to people who are struggling, that maybe they feel they haven't got so many friends, but actually when you explore with them, they've got lots of good connections with people that maybe they wouldn't call a friend in the traditional sense. But actually are fundamental high quality connections for them in their entire kind of social life and being. And it may be, it may be someone that you work alongside, that you don't, maybe not even in the same department, but you share, kitchen area or something within a workspace that actually is one of your strongest connections, but you never consider it that way because it's not someone you go, out for a drink with or do a pub quiz with or things like that.
Yeah. And we've often had people, I think, in those conversations, reflecting on actually the coffee guy in the morning. Somebody I remember saying to me, do you know what, actually, James downstairs, I'm always in early, we have a good chat, a good conversation. And it was actually only through the workshops and tuning into high quality connections and how they kind of look and feel, they were actually going, do you know what, I really, really enjoy those conversations. I look forward to them. We have a bit of a laugh and we have kind of a shared sense of humour, and it sets me up really well for the day. So as you said, it can be in those really short interactions that we're having with people. And it's interesting when we think about it in a work context. Not necessarily about having a best friend in work, even though I think research suggests we're 40% more likely to stay in an organisation if we feel we have a best friend in work. It is about those high quality connections that we have, which can be very broad and varied and across all of our interactions that we have with our leaders, managers, with our peers, different departments, people we're interacting with and engaging with. It is just about those quality connections that we're having, whereby in those interactions we feel that vitality, we feel that heightened sense of awareness and connection with that person. And it's interesting because in those conversations creates, and you touched on it actually at the beginning, Alex, around that self-worth. And Jane Dutton talks about kind of in those interactions, it creates a social dignity. And that kind of really confirms us as human beings, that we're here, we're present, we're alive, we're competent. And interesting as well, it's very much connected to, I touched on it there, competence, but actually as well gives us a heightened sense of our abilities when it is we're engaging with somebody in a really, really respectful way. They're really tuning into us as a person. They're, as I said, in that kind of present moment, and that gives us a heightened sense of self and also our abilities. So as I said, it's just so impactful in many ways.
It is. I love talking about it because it is just so fundamental and so impactful. So let's talk a bit then about more of in terms of a work context and the language that lots of businesses are focusing on at the moment, performance and well-being. So both of these things are really top of the agenda in every organization, every industry. Businesses are really hoping to grow out of the economic situation, not just in the UK, across the world. So performance is a big piece. How are we going to maintain performance without burning out? And how can we look after our people who've been through so much, and so many people still going through so much? How can we really help people to be well, so that we're looking at long-term performance? So what's the main impact? We've talked about so many different aspects here. What would be the biggest impact on performance on a daily basis, do you think, if we were thinking about relationships specifically, the good or bad?
Yeah, and it's an interesting, I was just looking at a recent piece of research, which was a Harvard Business Review, actually. So it was Jane Dutton herself back just a few years ago. And it's just some of the language that she was using in it, which really, really resonated with me. And she talked about we learn more when we learn together. And we rarely grow alone, which I thought was really, really impactful pieces around that, exactly. And actually, some psychologists are suggesting that we only grow in connecting with others. So it was really, really quite interesting. So absolutely is fundamental. So not only kind of when we think about high quality connections and all of those positive emotions that really come for that and from that, but also as well in those relationships, we have a stronger sense of meaning and purpose through those relationship pieces. But actually, outside of that, the fact that it supports our growth, it enables our growth, and that we rarely grow alone. So that just really resonated actually with me, and I think very relevant to that question.
It's lovely. There's something part about that touches on the human nature part that I was talking about us being living things, and it just reminds me of how important growth is, because actually all living things have a tendency towards growth. So I don't know if you had ways of remembering things, but when I was doing biology back at school, so this is really a long time ago, we had a little like an acronym like MERING for all the different aspects of living organisms. So movement, excretion, respiration, reproduction, irritability, nutrition, and growth. And growth is fundamental for living things. And I love that piece around the fact that actually through relationships we really grow. That's so meaningful to us as humans, and that's really what we're trying to tap into here in terms of thinking about human leadership and thinking about team flow. Is what's the extension? So it's not just having a best friend at work, actually having high quality connections through our entire population, in our teams, our departments, coaches, mentors, friends outside of work, family members. What are those connections? The connections with the people in the coffee shop. I've had one of those. There's a gentleman in Brighton who used to go to the same coffee shop every morning that I did, and I didn't know his name for years, but every day we would have a chat about the latest news and while we're waiting for our coffees. And it's just, it's those connections are absolutely incredible. As you said, for our dignity, what a lovely phrase. But to learn together around things, and a lot of reflection, I think, happens in learning together, which is why I love these live sessions with so many different people. I'm sitting here just absorbing all these lovely practical hints and tips and research.
Absolutely. And there are things we can do to focus in on building those high quality connections, not just those relationships in work, but also outside of work. And that is looking at how we build trust in those relationships. And there's lots of different ways, as we know, to do that. It's around how we respectfully engage with people, but also enable each other to really flourish and thrive and be at our best. So from a work context, whether that's, really supporting people from a mentoring perspective or coaching, and we can all be coaches. We can all really support each other. It's not just us as managers or as leaders, but how it is that we even look at the different tasks we do. Are we really enabling that person to use their strengths so they can be at their best and really feel energized and supported in that as well? So Jane, she does talk about ways that we can build and foster those relationships. And actually, when, it comes down to it, there are things that we can do, and we can do easily. And I think as well, just that additional point, when we think about relationships, it's not about those long-term relationships. It's about those connections that we can have in those short interactions with people, yes, which then feed into those longer term relationships, and obviously building and nurturing that trust. But there's also concepts around kind of swift trust as well. So in those kind of connection points, we might have a new project team we're engaging with. So we actually, swift trust as a concept. And then obviously, especially if we have aligned goals as well. So as I said, there's lots of considerations in that, and it's not those longer term pieces, it can be in those short interactions that we're having, and teams that we're just connecting in with for the first time.
And that's brilliant, isn't it? I love that notion of swift trust. And so what would you say creates swift trust?
So it's interesting. This was a concept, Deborah Mayerson, back actually some years ago. So when it is that we have a shared goal, a shared outcome, so it's kind of a new project team, we will kind of create this swift trust. So there's a trust that's established within that team, within that interaction coming together. And then obviously we can adapt, tailor obviously the trust in those relationships depending on those interactions. So that's then really where it is that we commit, and the time and the energy in making sure that those quality connections are really fostered. So obviously then that follows through. So it is really around those kind of shared goals, those shared priorities coming together as a new team, which I think is really, really important, because we know in the working world that's the reality. We have different project teams coming together, we have new people coming in, so it doesn't have to be, well, I'm going to wait and see if that person is trustworthy. There's actually lots of things that we can do to create that trust and that swift trust in that moment.
And that seems so important right now.
Yeah.
There are people, it feels to me like there's people moving roles more now than they ever have done before. People are making different decisions about where they live and what they do, and really thinking about what they want to do as well. And I think people are really considering that, and others being forced to make decisions about what they're doing that are out of their control too. So, it is obviously, it's a gift to be able to choose that. But I do think there's so many new teams coming together. The notion of swift trust seems very vital right now, of people being able to trust others that they're going in a good direction. And actually, there's quite a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of leaders to help shape that direction, make sure people have clarity of expectations. We talked about that last week, but that the team can really support that. It doesn't need to be just down on the shoulders of the leaders, that actually team members can create swift trust in the same way, without having to have someone, lay it out for them or create the platform. That's helpful, but doesn't need to be done in order to create those things. So it's a brilliant notion, and I think very relevant for the times we're experiencing, and more so probably going forwards with teams, coming together and then disbanding to work on something else in different systems and departments within large organizations.
Absolutely. And there's ways we can foster that trust. We talked about, being authentic, sharing information, being vulnerable. So all of those things then are fundamental to make sure that trust follows through and it continues to be nurtured in that relationship. So it's not about us. We all have to take that accountability in fostering trust, being respectful, building those high quality connections. And there's absolutely things that we can do in taking those steps in moving forward. It's not about us waiting for that person, whether they're trustworthy or that we should have that connection. But there's lots we can do and that we should do. And I think specifically in light of what we've all experienced, and I'm definitely hearing that from people, that we are more open to that, recognizing the importance of these connections that we have, because we haven't had the access that we would just normally have and taken for granted in the past.
Yes. And I've got so much more I want to talk to you about, but it's the close up of this session now. So I hope all our listeners and viewers have enjoyed kind of having this in-depth conversation with us about respectful relationships, because I've certainly enjoyed it, and it's so relevant for everything we're doing right now. And teams across the board could do with any reminder to refocus attention on nurturing those relationships and how to do it. So thank you so much, Grace, for your insights today. They're incredibly valuable. And I know you're working with teams every day on this stuff. So, hearing it and knowing what makes the difference is really supportive and really helpful. So thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you everyone for listening. We've got a couple more sessions to finish up the team focus on our live sessions. And you can catch all the links to all those events and recordings on our Bailey & French consulting page on LinkedIn. So thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.